September 27th, 1942, 0330 hours, Stalingrad, Soviet Union. Sergeant Yakov Pavlov crouched in the ruins of a 4-story apartment building, watching German soldiers move through the pre-dawn darkness 100 yards away. Behind him, scattered through the building's shell-damaged floors, were 24 Soviet soldiers, all that remained of the reconnaissance platoon that had seized this position 3 days earlier. The building overlooked Solekhnaya Street and 9th of January Square, controlling key approach to Volga River embankment, where Soviet forces maintained their last toehold in Stalingrad. Pavlov had a problem that was tactically absolute. His platoon was surrounded by German forces. The entire 6th Army under General Friedrich Paulus was attempting to capture Stalingrad, and this single building stood in the way of German advance to the river. He had no communication with Soviet headquarters 300 yards away across no man's land of rubble and fire. He had ammunition for perhaps 2 more days of fighting. He had no food beyond what soldiers had scavenged from destroyed apartments. He had 17 wounded men with no medical supplies, and German forces had already launched 9 attacks trying to recapture the building, with 10th attack clearly preparing. The mathematics said, impossible. 25 men cannot hold single building against division strength attacks. The building had no fortifications beyond rubble walls.
3 of 4 walls had been damaged by artillery, making structure unstable. Germans controlled all approaches, making resupply impossible. Soviet doctrine said isolated positions surrounded by enemy should be abandoned before encirclement becomes complete. But abandoning this building meant Germans would reach Volga, would cut Soviet forces in 2, would win Battle of Stalingrad. Pavlov made decision in approximately 5 seconds that would transform random apartment building into most defended structure in military history. He would not retreat. He would not surrender. Instead, he would turn apartment building into fortress, using rubble as fortification, using buildings' civilians as intelligence network, using buildings' elevation as observation post directing Soviet artillery onto German positions. He would hold this building for as long as physically possible, not because orders required it, but because losing it meant losing Stalingrad. Think about that calculation. September 1942. 25 soldiers in damaged buildings surrounded by 100,000 German troops. Soviet doctrine said retreat. Common sense said survival impossible. But retreating meant abandoning position that controlled square, that controlled approach to river, that controlled battle, that determined whether Soviet Union would survive German invasion. What Pavlov didn't know as he organized defensive positions through buildings' ruined floors was that his 60-day defense would cost German forces more casualties than they had suffered capturing entire city of Paris in 1940. That Wehrmacht would lose more men trying to take single apartment building in Stalingrad than they had lost conquering France's capital. This comparison would become legendary, demonstrating that Soviet soldiers defending homeland fought with intensity German forces hadn't encountered during victorious campaigns across Western Europe. What Pavlov didn't know was that within weeks Soviet command would designate his building as Pavlov's house on military maps, unusual honor for NCO to have tactical position named after him rather than after geographic feature or superior officer. That this naming would make buildings' defense personal rather than merely tactical, transforming fight for apartment building into fight for Pavlov's house, making defense symbolic of individual Soviet soldiers' determination to defend motherland. What Pavlov didn't know was that buildings' defenders would become microcosm of Soviet Union's ethnic diversity. Russians, Ukrainians, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, Georgians, Jews, Tatars, all fighting together in single building, proving that Hitler's expectation that Soviet multi-ethnic state would collapse under pressure was fundamentally wrong. That this diversity in single buildings garrison
would be emphasized in Soviet propaganda, demonstrating that all Soviet peoples united against fascist invasion. What Pavlov didn't know was that he would survive battle, survive war, be awarded Hero of Soviet Union, and then in 1946 would become Orthodox monk, taking new name Brother Kirill, living in monastery until death in 1981. That this transformation from warrior to monk would demonstrate that soldiers who endured extreme combat sometimes find peace only through complete renunciation of violence and complete devotion to spiritual life. What Pavlov didn't know was that building would remain standing after battle, heavily damaged but structurally intact, and would be preserved as memorial rather than demolished. That, in post-war reconstruction, all other damaged buildings on Square would be rebuilt, while Pavlov's house would be deliberately left showing battle damage. The tourists visiting Stalingrad, renamed Volgograd 1961, would stand before building reading memorial plaque explaining that 25 men held this position for 60 days. What Pavlov didn't know was that German veterans returning to Stalingrad decades after battle would visit Pavlov's house and would testify that attacking this building was a nightmare that exceeded even their Eastern Front expectations of Soviet resistance. That German after-action reports would describe building's defense as fanatical, impossible, beyond rational explanation. Wehrmacht officers unable to comprehend how 25 men could sustain defense that killed hundreds of attackers. What Pavlov didn't know was that tactical innovations his garrison developed, using rubble as firing positions, coordinating with artillery observers, employing civilians as intelligence network, creating interlocking fields of fire through windows and shell holes, would be studied by military forces worldwide as example of urban defensive warfare. That his techniques would influence how armies train for city fighting, demonstrating that properly defended building can withstand attacks by forces 10 or 20 times larger. What Pavlov didn't know was that KGB would investigate him after war, questioning whether his 1946 decision to become monk indicated ideological unreliability or psychological damage from combat, that authorities would monitor him in monastery, ensuring that Hero of Soviet Union wasn't using religious life to escape socialist duties, that despite surveillance, he would maintain monastic vows until death, proving that commitment to spiritual life could coexist with loyalty to state that officially promoted atheism. The mathematics of defense were being written in ammunition expenditure rates and casualty ratios and structural engineering calculations that would determine whether single building could serve as breakwater against German offensive tide. And those mathematics would prove that sometimes tactical significance of terrain exceeds strategic calculations, that losing 200 square meter building can matter more than losing 200 square kilometer territory. By the time German forces launched 10th attack on September 30th, 3 days after Pavlov's initial seizure of building, the transformation from reconnaissance position to fortress was complete. And the calculation that defensive value of elevated structure overlooking key terrain justified casualties required to hold it had been made not through staff planning, but through sergeants' battlefield assessment that this ground was worth dying for. September 23rd to 26, 1942. 4 days before Pavlov's dawn assessment, Soviet 13th Guards Rifle Division received orders to recapture several key buildings in Stalingrad city center that German forces had seized during September offensive. Division Operations Order dated September 23, 1942, preserved at Central Archives of Russian Ministry of Defense, specified objectives with precision that reflected desperate tactical situation.
According to the order, 13th Guards Rifle Division will conduct limited counterattack to recapture buildings overlooking 9th January Square. Priority objective: 4-story apartment building located coordinates, redacted controlling approaches to Volga embankment. Building designated Objective 28. Reconnaissance platoon will seize building, establish defensive position, hold until reinforced. Building is essential for maintaining Soviet presence in city center. Loss of this position would allow German forces to establish observation posts, directing artillery onto Volga crossing points, cutting Soviet supply lines. The order reflected brutal reality of Stalingrad fighting by September 1942. German 6th Army had captured 90% of city through month-long offensive. Soviet forces retained only narrow strip along Volga River, in some places less than 500 yards deep, clinging to embankment and factory district. Every building in Soviet hands was fortress. Every building lost was catastrophe. Urban warfare had devolved into room-by-room fighting, where battles were measured in meters rather than kilometers. Sergeant Yakov Pavlov commanded reconnaissance platoon from 42nd Guards Rifle Regiment, 13th Guards Rifle Division. His platoon, approximately 30 soldiers, was designated for Objective 28 assault. Pavlov was 24 years old, peasant from Novgorod region, drafted 1938, veteran of defensive campaigns in Ukraine 1941, where he had demonstrated leadership under fire, earning sergeant stripes and guards designation. His after-action report, dated October 15, 1942, described building's initial seizure.
According to the report, on night of September 27, 1942, at 22:30 hours, my platoon received orders to assault and capture four-story apartment building overlooking 9th January Square. Intelligence indicated building was lightly held by German forces, perhaps one squad occupying ground floor. We moved through ruins approaching building from southeast using rubble as cover. Reached building perimeter at 0100 hours September 27th. Observed German sentries at main entrance. Launched assault at 0130 hours. Grenades through ground floor windows followed by rifle fire and close assault. Germans retreated from building within 15 minutes. We secured all 4 floors by 0200 hours. Found building heavily damaged. Southwest wall partially collapsed from artillery hit. Multiple shell holes in exterior walls, interior apartments destroyed, but structure was intact and position commanded excellent observation over square and approaches to river. What Pavlov found inside building provided unexpected intelligence and resources. According to his report, building had been apartment complex housing approximately 200 civilians before war. Most apartments were abandoned, but we found several civilians still sheltering in basement, approximately 15 people, including elderly and children who had nowhere else to go. They provided information about German positions and movements. They helped identify safe routes for approaching building. Most significantly, one civilian, machinist from local factory, helped us identify building's structural strengths, showing which walls could support heavy weapons and which sections were damaged beyond use. This civilian cooperation would become crucial to defense. Pavlov's report continued. Civilians agreed to remain in basement rather than attempting to cross to Soviet lines, which would have been suicidal. They understood building was now military position and that they were effectively combatants by remaining. But alternative was dying in no man's land attempting escape. Several civilians, particularly younger men, volunteered to help with defensive preparations, carrying ammunition, identifying approach routes Germans might use, serving as lookouts. This created an unusual situation where military garrison and civilian population merged into single defensive force. German response to building's capture was immediate and violent. According to Pavlov's report, at 0600 hours, September 27th, 4 hours after we secured building, German artillery commenced bombardment. Approximately 30 minutes of sustained fire, building shook violently. Additional damage to southwest wall. 1 soldier killed by shell fragment. At 0700 hours, artillery stopped and German infantry attacked from west. approximately 40 soldiers advancing across square. We engaged from second and third floor windows. Germans reached within 20 meters of building before we drove them back. Estimated 15 German casualties. They withdrew at 07:15 hours.
Second attack came at 0900 hours. Larger force, perhaps 60 soldiers, better coordinated. Repulsed at cost of 2 more casualties to our platoon. By end of September 27th, we had repulsed 4 German attacks, and our effective strength was reduced to 24 soldiers. That evening, Pavlov attempted to establish communication with Soviet lines. According to his report, at 2000 hours I sent 3 runners to cross to Soviet positions requesting reinforcement and resupply. All 3 were killed by German fire within 100 yards of building. We were effectively isolated, no radio contact, no courier contact, surrounded by German forces on 3 sides with Volga at our back. This isolation would last 6 days before Soviet forces could establish supply line.
During those 6 days, Pavlov's garrison would survive on captured German rations, ammunition scavenged from dead German soldiers, and water from shell holes in buildings' basement. September 27th to October 3rd, 1942. Battalion Commissar Nikolai Zabolotny's report dated October 5th, 1942, described Soviet command's awareness of Pavlov's situation and inability to relieve his garrison during first week. According to Zabolotny's report, from September 27th through October 3rd, 13th Guards Rifle Division was aware that reconnaissance platoon under Sergeant Pavlov held building overlooking 9th of January Square, but was unable to establish contact or provide resupply. German forces controlled all approaches to building.
Multiple attempts to reach Pavlov's position failed with heavy casualties. We could observe building from our lines, approximately 300 yards distance, and could see that garrison was still fighting because we observed muzzle flashes from buildings' windows during German attacks, but we could not communicate with them and could not determine their status or requirements. This observation without communication created unusual psychological dynamic. Soviet command knew building was held, could see evidence of continuing defense, but didn't know defender strength, ammunition status, or casualty count. For 6 days, Pavlov's garrison fought independently without orders, without resupply, without communication, beyond visual observation that Soviet forces could see their continued resistance.
Zabolotny's report continued. From observation posts, we counted German attacks on building. Minimum 2 attacks daily, some days 4 or 5 attacks. Each attack involved 40 to 60 German soldiers advancing across square, attempting to reach building's ground floor. Each attack was repulsed with German casualties visible in square. This confirmed garrison was still effective, but gave no information about their status. Major concern was ammunition. Without resupply, garrison would eventually exhaust ammunition and be forced to surrender or be overrun. Decision was made on September 30th to attempt supply run regardless of casualties, because allowing garrison to fall after defending so tenaciously would be unacceptable. The supply run succeeded on October 3rd, barely. According to Zabolotny's report, on night of October 3rd, 5-man team under Lieutenant Ivan Afanasyev attempted to reach Pavlov's building carrying ammunition, food, and radio equipment. Team used ruins as cover, moving slowly through rubble. German forces detected movement and opened fire. 2 team members killed, 1 wounded, but remaining 2, Lieutenant Afanasyev and Private Alexandrov, reached building successfully at 0200 hours October 4th. They delivered supplies and established first communication with Pavlov since September 27th. Afanasyev reported garrison was down to 18 effective soldiers from original 30. 6 killed, 6 wounded, 2 missing, presumed dead. Ammunition nearly exhausted. Food gone for 3 days. But defensive positions were well established and garrison morale was excellent. Pavlov requested reinforcement, additional ammunition, and anti-tank weapons. This communication established that Pavlov's garrison had survived 6 days of isolation while repelling estimated 20 German attacks. Casualty ratio analysis from later reports calculated approximately 15 German casualties per Soviet casualty during this period, unsustainable for Germans who were attacking, but acceptable for Soviets who were defending key terrain. Soviet command decision following Afanasyev's report was to transform Pavlov's makeshift defensive position into permanent fortress by providing reinforcement, weapons, and engineering support to maximize building's defensive value. October 4th to 10, 1942. Over 1 week beginning October 4th, Soviet forces converted Pavlov's house from desperate isolated garrison into sophisticated defensive fortress through incremental reinforcement and tactical improvements. Engineering report dated October 11, 1942, documented fortification work. According to the report, following establishment of communication with Pavlov's garrison, Division Engineer Battalion planned fortification improvements. Key objectives: create protected supply route for resupply and reinforcement, strengthen building structure to withstand artillery, establish interlocking fields of fire covering all approaches, coordinate building's defense with division artillery to provide supporting fire against German attacks. The supply route created was audacious engineering feat under combat conditions. According to the report, engineers constructed trench system running approximately 300 yards from Soviet forward positions to Pavlov's building. Trench was approximately 2 meters deep, providing protection from small arms fire, though not from artillery. Construction occurred nightly over 6 nights, October 4th, 10. Work parties dug approximately 50 yards per night under German observation and fire. Multiple casualties among engineers, but trench was completed. This trench, designated Pavlov's Corridor, allowed regular resupply and reinforcement, transforming isolated position into sustainable outpost. Through Pavlov's Corridor came reinforcement that brought garrison strength to approximately 30 soldiers, ammunition resupply including anti-tank rifles and machine guns, food and water, medical supplies for wounded, and crucially, concrete and sandbags for fortification. The fortification work maximized building's defensive advantages while minimizing structural weaknesses. According to engineering report, building had natural defensive strengths: elevation, providing observation over square brick construction, providing protection against small arms, multiple firing positions through windows and shell holes. Weaknesses were damaged southwest wall, reducing structural integrity, and lack of prepared positions, making defenders visible to German observers. Improvements included reinforcing southwest wall with rubble and sandbags, creating protected firing positions behind rubble walls at each window, establishing forward observation post on 4th floor with telephone connection to Soviet artillery, mining approaches to building with captured German mines, and creating interlocking fields of fire, ensuring no dead ground where German soldiers could approach without being engaged. Most significantly, the report noted, 4th floor observation post transformed building from defensive position into offensive asset. Observer with telephone connection could direct Soviet artillery onto German positions throughout square and beyond. This meant building wasn't merely defended, it was weapons platform enabling Soviet forces to strike German rear areas. German attempts to capture building weren't just about removing defensive obstacle, but about eliminating observation post that was directing accurate artillery fire onto German troop concentrations. Senior Lieutenant Ivan Afanasyev, who commanded garrison after October 4th reinforcement, described tactical organization in October 20th report. According to Afanasyev, garrison was organized by floor, ground floor, 4 soldiers covering main entrance and windows facing square, primary defensive line repelling German assault attempts. Second floor, 8 soldiers with machine guns covering approaches from west and north. Secondary defensive line engaging German forces before they reached building. Third floor, 6 soldiers with anti-tank rifles engaging German armor. Germans had attempted to use armored vehicles to suppress our fire, but anti-tank rifles drove them back. Fourth floor, 2 observers directing Soviet artillery and 2 snipers engaging German officers and machine gun crews. Basement, 4 soldiers serving as reserve and protecting civilians who remained sheltering there. Total garrison strength, 26 soldiers plus Sergeant Pavlov, who commanded overall defense from second floor position. This organization created defense in depth, where German forces attacking building faced engagement at increasing intensity as they approached. Artillery fire directed from fourth floor observation posts struck them at distance. Machine gun fire from second and third floors engaged them crossing square, and close-range rifle fire from ground floor positions met them at building perimeter. German casualties mounted progressively with each zone, making successful assault prohibitively expensive. October 10 to November 25, 1942. Over 46 days from establishment of Pavlov's corridor until German offensive culminated in late November, Pavlov's house absorbed repeated attacks that tested whether improved fortifications could withstand division-strength pressure. Soviet after-action summary dated December 1, 1942, compiled attack statistics from October-November fighting. According to the summary, German forces launched estimated 60 separate attacks on building designated Pavlov's house during October 10, November 25 period. Attacks ranged from platoon-strength probes, 30 to 40 soldiers, to company-strength assaults, 100-plus soldiers supported by armor. No German attack succeeded in capturing building, though several attacks penetrated to ground floor before being repulsed. Soviet casualties during this period: 8 killed, 17 wounded from garrison averaging 30 soldiers, 83% casualty rate. German casualties estimated at 500 plus killed and wounded based on bodies recovered from square and German prisoner interrogations. Casualties ratio approximately 15.1 in Soviet favor. This casualty ratio, 15 German casualties for every Soviet casualty, was extraordinary given that attacking forces typically enjoy casualty advantage against static defenders when attackers can concentrate overwhelming force. That defenders achieved reverse ratio demonstrated both tactical skill of garrison and poor German assault tactics. German tactical approaches varied as commanders attempted different solutions to seemingly impossible problem of dislodging determined defenders from elevated position. According to Soviet intelligence summary, German forces employed multiple assault methods: direct infantry assault across square, accepted heavy casualties reaching building perimeter, but couldn't overcome close-range defense. Armor support, using tanks and assault guns to suppress Soviet fire, was defeated by anti-tank rifles and Soviet artillery directed from building. Artillery preparation before assault damaged building further, but never destroyed defensive positions because rubble provided protection. Night attacks achieved surprise, but couldn't overcome garrison's familiarity with building layout and prepared positions. Flamethrower attacks attempted to burn out defenders, but brick construction limited fire spread. Each method failed, producing German casualties without corresponding success. The defenders' advantages were multiple: elevation providing observation over attacking forces, prepared positions providing protection, interior lines allowing rapid reinforcement of threatened positions, telephone connection to Soviet artillery enabling supporting fire, and perhaps, most significantly, psychological advantage of defending symbolically important position that became matter of pride, preventing surrender regardless of tactical logic. Garrison member Private Alexander Sokolov's letter home, dated October 28, 1942, captured psychological dimension. The letter stated, "We call this Pavlov's house, though it's not house, it's fortress. Every German attack is repulsed. Every day we see German bodies in square. They keep attacking because taking this building is important to them, but we will never surrender because holding this building is more important to us. This building is our home now. We've defended it for months. We know every room, every window, every crack in walls. Germans are strangers attacking our home. They can't win because this is ours." This psychological ownership, garrison viewing building as personal possession worth unlimited sacrifice to defend, created motivation exceeding what orders alone could produce. Pavlov's house wasn't just military position, it was home that garrison had earned through sustained defense, making surrender psychologically impossible regardless of tactical circumstances. The multi-ethnic composition of garrison became source of pride. According to Sokolov's November 15th letter, "Our garrison includes Russians, Ukrainians, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, Georgians, Jews, Tatars, Soviet Union in miniature. We fight together defending same building." Hitler said Soviet peoples would turn against each other under pressure. He was wrong. Pressure united us. When Georgian soldier carries ammunition for Russian machine gunner who provides cover for Uzbek soldier treating wounded Kazakh soldier, that's what defeats fascism. Not just bullets, but unity Hitler didn't expect. This emphasis on ethnic diversity wasn't merely propaganda. Garrison composition reflected Red Army's actual diversity and defenders' genuine belief that multi-ethnic cooperation proved Soviet system's superiority over Nazi racial ideology. November 19th to 23, 1942. While Pavlov's garrison maintained its isolated defense, Soviet forces were preparing strategic counteroffensive that would transform entire Stalingrad battle from desperate defense into victorious encirclement. Operation Uranus operational plan, dated November 10, 1942, preserved at Russian Ministry of Defense archives, outlined Soviet strategy for encircling German Sixth Army. According to the plan, Soviet forces will launch coordinated attacks from north and south of Stalingrad city, beginning November 19th. Northern attack Southwestern Front and Don Front will penetrate weak Romanian positions northwest of city, advancing southeast. Southern attack Stalingrad Front will penetrate weak Romanian positions south of city, advancing northwest. Objectives: attacks meet west of city, encircling German Sixth Army and cutting supply lines. German forces in Stalingrad will be trapped and forced to surrender or be destroyed. The operation succeeded beyond expectations. According to Soviet after-action report dated November 30th, 1942, Operation Uranus commenced November 19th as planned. Romanian defensive positions collapsed rapidly under Soviet assault. Northern Pincer advanced 60 kilometers in 3 days. Southern Pincer advanced 50 kilometers in 3 days. Pincers met at Kalach November 23rd, completing encirclement. German Sixth Army, approximately 300,000 soldiers, was trapped in Stalingrad pocket. Hitler ordered Sixth Army to hold position rather than attempt breakout. German forces in Stalingrad were now besieged rather than besieging Soviet forces. This strategic reversal transformed tactical situation for Pavlov's garrison. According to Garrison's November 25th report, German attacks on our buildings ceased November 23rd, coinciding with Operation Uranus encirclement. German forces apparently received orders to consolidate defensive positions rather than continuing offensive operations. For first time in 60 days, we are not under daily attack. However, German forces still control positions surrounding our building and will likely resume attacks if Hitler orders renewed offensive. But renewed German offensive never came. German Sixth Army was now concerned with survival rather than victory. Pavlov's garrison had held building through 2 months of sustained German attacks. They would continue holding through 3 more months until German surrender February 1943. February 2, 1943. German 6th Army surrendered February 2, 1943, after 3 months of encirclement had reduced force from 300,000 soldiers to approximately 90,000 survivors, with remainder killed, wounded, or frozen to death during winter siege. Field Marshal Paulus's surrender order dated February 2, 1943, preserved at German Federal Archives, stated, "Troops have exhausted ammunition and food supplies. Further defense is impossible. Troops will cease fire and surrender to Soviet forces." For Pavlov's garrison, victory meant walking out of building they had defended for 125 days, September 27, 1942, through February 2, 1943, according to Pavlov's final report. On February 3, 1943, we received orders to abandon defensive positions at building and consolidate with division forces preparing for advance westward. My garrison had held this building continuously for 125 days, repelling estimated 60 German attacks and sustaining 80% casualties through rotation. Final garrison strength, February 3rd, 12 soldiers from original platoon that seized building September 27th, plus various replacements who had joined during October-November. We left building standing, damaged but intact. Civilians who had sheltered in basement throughout siege emerged and crossed to Soviet lines. Building had become symbol of Soviet defense of Stalingrad and would be preserved as memorial. Post-battle assessment calculated building's strategic value exceeded all expectations. According to Division After Action Summary dated February 15, 1943, building designated Pavlov's House controlled key terrain overlooking 9th of January Square throughout battle. Defense of this single building prevented German forces from establishing observation posts directing fire onto Volga crossings. Building's 4th floor observation post directed Soviet artillery throughout October-November, inflicting significant German casualties. Most significantly, building's sustained defense became symbol of Soviet resistance, demonstrating that individual positions matter and that small units properly fortified can defeat vastly superior attacking forces. The summary included remarkable comparison that would become legendary. German casualties attempting to capture Pavlov's house exceeded German casualties capturing Paris in 1940 campaign. Wehrmacht estimated approximately 500+ casualties at Pavlov's house during October-November fighting. Wehrmacht suffered approximately 300 casualties during entire Paris operation, May-June 1940. This demonstrates intensity of Stalingrad fighting exceeded any combat Germans had experienced in Western Europe. Soviet defenders fighting for homeland displayed determination German forces hadn't encountered during victorious campaigns against France, Belgium, Netherlands. This comparison, more casualties taking one building in Stalingrad than taking entire capital of France, captured both Soviet propaganda value and genuine tactical reality that urban warfare against motivated defenders costs attackers catastrophically more than mobile warfare against defenders who retreat. 1943 to 1981. Yakov Pavlov's post-war life demonstrated that soldiers who survive extreme combat often seek meaning through complete transformation rather than attempting to resume pre-war existence. Pavlov was awarded Hero of Soviet Union, highest Soviet military decoration, on June 17, 1945, for his defense of the building. Citations stated, for exemplary fulfillment of command assignments and for courage and heroism displayed in battles against Nazi invaders. He was promoted to lieutenant and served remainder of war in combat, eventually reaching Berlin in 1945 as part of final Soviet offensive. According to his military service record, he participated in liberation of Poland, and assault on Germany, demonstrating that surviving Stalingrad didn't make him cautious, but rather confirmed his capability for sustained combat. But in 1946, 1 year after war ended, Pavlov made a decision that shocked military and Communist Party authorities. He requested discharge from military and announced intention to become Orthodox monk. This decision was politically problematic. Soviet state promoted atheism as official ideology. Orthodox Church was tolerated but discouraged. Hero of Soviet Union becoming monk suggested either psychological damage from combat or ideological unreliability, both concerning to authorities who wanted war heroes to exemplify Soviet values rather than seeking refuge in religion. KGB investigation dated August 1946, preserved at Russian state archives, assessed Pavlov's fitness and loyalty. According to investigation, subject Pavlov has requested discharge to enter monastery. Investigation determines subject shows no signs of cowardice or disloyalty. Subject's combat record is exemplary. Subject states motivation for monastic life is spiritual calling resulting from surviving combat where many comrades died. Subject believes he survived because God has purpose for him, and that purpose is religious service. Psychological evaluation suggests subject suffers survivor guilt, common among combat veterans who lost many comrades. Recommendation: allow discharge as subject has fulfilled military obligations. Monitor subject in monastery to ensure religious activities don't indicate anti-Soviet attitudes. Pavlov entered Trinity Lavra of St.
Sergius Monastery, taking monastic name Brother Kirill. He maintained monastic vows from 1946 until death in 1981. 35 years of prayer and service compared to 3 years of combat service. This ratio, 11 years of religious life for every year of combat, suggested that warfare's psychological cost required sustained spiritual healing that secular life couldn't provide. Brother Kirill, formerly Pavlov, rarely discussed war experience according to monastery records. When pressed, he would say, "I did what any Soviet soldier would do, defended motherland, many died. I survived. Why did I survive when better men died? This question brought me here seeking answer through prayer.
I still don't know answer, but prayer gives peace that war never gave." This testimony revealed combat's lasting psychological impact, survivor guilt that decades of peaceful monastic life couldn't fully resolve. Pavlov had earned military glory through sustained courage, but found glory insufficient to address existential questions survival raised. He died September 28, 1981, 39 years and 1 day after initial seizure of building that would bear his name. Funeral was attended by veterans from 13th Guards Rifle Division and by Monastery Brotherhood. His obituary in Soviet military newspaper stated, "Hero of Soviet Union Yakov Pavlov has died. He will be remembered for his defense of Stalingrad, which demonstrated Soviet people's determination to defeat fascism." Obituary didn't mention his 35 years as monk, omission reflecting Soviet discomfort with religious aspect of hero's life. 1945 to present. Pavlov's house survived battle and was deliberately preserved as memorial rather than demolished during post-war reconstruction. Stalingrad reconstruction plan, dated 1945, specified that destroyed buildings would be cleared and city rebuilt according to Soviet architectural principles. But notation in plans stated, building at coordinates designated Pavlov's house will be preserved in damaged condition as memorial to Battle of Stalingrad.
All other buildings on 9th January Square will be reconstructed, but this building will remain showing battle damage. This decision created unusual memorial, damaged building surrounded by new construction, serving as physical reminder of battle's intensity. Memorial plaque installed 1965 stated, "In this building, a group of Soviet soldiers under command of Sergeant Yakov Pavlov heroically held defense for 58 days during Battle of Stalingrad, 1942-1943, repelling numerous enemy attacks." The plaque's 58 days differs from more accurate 60-plus days, reflecting early post-war uncertainty about precise dates. Modern historical analysis confirms building was defended from September 27, 1942 through February 2, 1943. 125 days total, with most intense fighting during first 60 days before Operation Uranus Encirclement reduced German pressure.
Building became tourist destination. According to Volgograd, Stalingrad renamed 1961, Tourism Statistics, over 500,000 visitors annually visit Pavlov's house, making it among most visited World War II sites in Russia. Visitors can walk around building's exterior seeing preserved shell damage and can read memorial plaques explaining defense's historical significance. German veterans who returned to Stalingrad, Volgograd after war specifically visited Pavlov's house. Günther von Below, German artillery officer who participated in Stalingrad battle, wrote in 1978 Memoir, "I visited Pavlov's house in 1975 as tourist, seeing building in peacetime, surrounded by rebuilt city, now memorial rather than battlefield, was profoundly emotional. My unit attacked this building repeatedly. We suffered terrible casualties."
We never understood how small Soviet garrison could sustain defense that killed so many of our men. Standing before building 33 years later, I felt both respect for defenders' courage and sorrow for senseless slaughter that urban warfare produces. That building should have been avoided rather than attacked. But Hitler's orders were to take every building regardless of cost. Pavlov's house proved that cost can exceed any tactical value. This testimony from German veteran acknowledged what Soviet defenders had proven, that properly defended position held by determined defenders can defeat vastly superior attacking forces through combination of tactical skill, fortification, and psychological determination to never surrender.
Statistical analysis comparing casualty ratios in various Stalingrad defensive positions revealed that Pavlov's house achieved most favorable ratio for defenders, 15.1 German casualties per Soviet casualty, demonstrating effective urban defense principles. Military historical research documented that average casualty ratio for urban defensive positions at Stalingrad was approximately 3.1, favoring defenders, 3 attacking casualties per defending casualty. This reflected natural advantage defenders enjoy in urban terrain, where attackers must cross open ground while defenders fire from protected positions. Pavlov's house achieved 15.1 ratio, 5 times better than average, through combination of factors. Building's elevation providing observation over approaches, allowing defenders to engage attackers at distance. Fortification work, creating protected firing positions, maximizing defenders' protection while minimizing exposure. Coordination with Soviet artillery transforming building from passive defensive position into offensive weapons platform. Psychological ownership, creating garrison determined never to surrender. And multi-ethnic composition proving Soviet unity, undermining German expectations that Soviet state would collapse. Comparison to other famous defensive positions revealed Pavlov's house was among most effective building defenses in military history.
Alamo, 1836. Defenders achieved approximately 10.1 ratio before being overwhelmed. Wake Island, 1941. Defenders achieved approximately 2.1 ratio. Pavlov's house, 15.1 ratio, exceeded these precedents, demonstrating that when defenders have protected positions, adequate ammunition through sustained resupply, artillery support, and psychological determination, small forces can inflict catastrophic casualties on much larger attacking forces. The Paris comparison, Wehrmacht suffering more casualties at Pavlov's house than capturing entire French capital, revealed both propaganda value and genuine tactical insight. Wehrmacht had conquered Paris through mobile warfare, encountering minimal resistance as French forces retreated. Stalingrad required street-by-street fighting against defenders who never retreated.
This contrast demonstrated that military success depends not just on force ratios or technological superiority, but critically on defenders' determination to resist. France's relatively quick collapse stemmed from political and military decision that further resistance was futile. Soviet Union's sustained resistance stemmed from decision that resistance was necessary regardless of casualties. Pavlov's house epitomized this determination. 25 men deciding single building was worth unlimited sacrifice to defend, because losing it meant losing Stalingrad, which meant losing war. Pavlov's house defense revealed fundamental truths about relationship between tactical terrain and strategic outcomes, about how psychological determination can overcome material disadvantages, about urban warfare's favorability to defenders when properly prepared, and about why individual acts of resistance can achieve strategic significance beyond tactical scope. First truth: elevated positions controlling key terrain can achieve strategic value exceeding their physical size when defended by forces willing to accept casualties necessary for sustained defense. Pavlov's house was 200 square meter building, tactically insignificant compared to kilometers of front line, but building's elevation overlooking 9th of January Square and approaches to Volga made it observation platform enabling Soviet artillery to strike German positions throughout sector. Losing building would have given Germans observation post directing fire onto Soviet supply lines. Defending building prevented this while allowing Soviets to maintain observation advantage. This transformed building from mere defensive position into weapons platform with strategic impact. Lesson is that terrain value isn't determined by size but by function. Small positions controlling key observation, approaches, or communications can matter more than large territories lacking these advantages. Second truth: small forces properly fortified with adequate resupply can defeat vastly superior attacking forces through combination of protected positions, interlocking fields of fire, and artillery support. Pavlov's garrison never exceeded 30 soldiers, but inflicted estimated 500+ German casualties through defensive principles maximizing advantages. Garrison created firing positions protecting defenders while exposing attackers, established interlocking fields ensuring no dead ground where attackers could approach safely, and coordinated with Soviet artillery to strike attackers before they reached building. These principles, protection, fire coordination, supporting fires, enabled disproportionate casualty ratios that made attacking prohibitively expensive. Lesson is that defensive warfare properly executed favors defenders because attackers must expose themselves to advance while defenders fire from protected positions. This advantage can compensate for enormous numerical disparities when defenders exploit terrain and fortification systematically. Third truth: psychological ownership of defensive positions creates determination exceeding what orders alone can produce, making positions nearly impossible to capture without destroying them completely. Pavlov's garrison came to view building as personal possession earned through sustained defense and casualties endured. Building wasn't just military position, it was their home that they had defended for 2 months, making it psychologically theirs. This ownership created motivation to resist that exceeded tactical logic. Garrison members preferred dying defending building to surrendering it, because surrendering would mean betraying comrades who had already died defending it. This psychological investment made building functionally impossible to capture without destroying it entirely,
because garrison would never voluntarily yield position they'd earned through sacrifice.
Lesson is that sustained defensive position creates emotional bonds to terrain, making positions more defensible over time rather than less, contrary to assumption that defenders weaken as siege continues. Properly motivated defenders strengthen as they accumulate investment in position survival. Fourth truth: multi-ethnic cooperation under pressure can prove ideology's falsity more effectively than abstract arguments when diverse soldiers fight together, demonstrating unity that racist ideology claims impossible. Pavlov's garrison included Russians, Ukrainians, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, Georgians, Jews, Tatars, Soviet Union's ethnic diversity and microcosm. These soldiers fought together, shared hardships, saved each other's lives, and sustained defense through cooperation rather than conflict. This direct experience proved that Nazi ideology about ethnic hierarchies and inevitable ethnic conflict was false. Germans attacking buildings saw a multi-ethnic garrison fighting effectively together, demonstrating that diversity was strength rather than weakness. Lesson is that direct experience contradicting ideology proves ideology's falsity more effectively than theoretical arguments. Seeing diverse soldiers cooperating overcomes racist ideology in ways abstract appeals to equality cannot achieve. Fifth truth: physical memorials preserving battle damage create lasting historical memory more effectively than rebuilt structures because preserved damage provides tangible evidence of combat's intensity. Pavlov's house preserved with shell damage serves as physical reminder of battle, allowing post-war visitors to see what urban warfare produces. Rebuilt city surrounding damaged building creates contrast, highlighting battle's destruction. Tourists visiting memorials see actual building, actual soldiers defended, rather than reconstruction or monument requiring imagination to visualize combat. This physical presence makes history real in ways photographs or narratives alone cannot achieve. Lesson is that preserving battle sites maintains historical memory by providing tangible connection to past events. Standing before actual defended building creates understanding of defenders' circumstances that reading about defense cannot replicate. Sergeant Yakov Pavlov's journey from reconnaissance platoon leader to building defender to hero of Soviet Union to Orthodox monk represented transformation, revealing both warfare's psychological costs and spiritual peace's appeal for soldiers who survived extreme combat. What began as 3-day reconnaissance mission evolved through 2 months of sustained defense into symbol of Soviet resistance, proving that individual acts of courage can achieve strategic significance. What military career achieved through aggressive defense couldn't provide lasting peace, requiring Pavlov to seek spiritual life, addressing existential questions survival raised. The building itself, damaged 4-story apartment complex transformed into fortress through soldier ingenuity and sustained defense, proved that tactical terrain's value isn't inherent, but rather is created through how forces use it. Empty building had no value. Building defended by determined garrison became strategic asset preventing German advance. Building preserved as memorial became historical monument teaching future generations about urban warfare's intensity and defenders' determination. By the time German 6th Army surrendered February 1943, Pavlov's house had become legendary, symbol of Soviet resistance, proof that determined defenders could defeat superior attacking forces, demonstration that multi-ethnic cooperation could achieve what racism claimed impossible. The mathematics of that defense were written in casualty ratios favoring defenders 15.1, in artillery strikes directed from 4th floor observation post, in psychological determination that made surrender impossible regardless of tactical circumstances.
Those mathematics proved that sometimes single building matters more than entire armies, because building controls key terrain, provides observation enabling fires, and becomes symbol of resistance that transcends tactical calculations. The comparison to Paris, Wehrmacht losing more men at single building than capturing French capital, captured both Soviet propaganda value and genuine insight that warfare's intensity depends not on forces involved, but on defenders' determination to resist. Paris fell quickly because France judged further resistance futile.
Stalingrad held despite overwhelming German superiority because Soviet Union judged resistance necessary. Pavlov's house epitomized this determination. 25 men holding 200 square meter building against 100,000-man army because they decided this ground was worth dying for. 40 years later, when Brother Kirill, formerly Sergeant Pavlov, died in monastery having spent 11 years of peaceful spiritual life for every year of violent combat service, the question he had asked, "Why did I survive when better men died?" remained unanswered except through faith. But his survival had served purpose, proving that small forces properly led can achieve disproportionate impact, that urban defense favors determined defenders, that multi-ethnic cooperation defeats racist ideology, and that sustained resistance against overwhelming odds is possible when soldiers decide that ground they defend matters more than their individual survival. The building stands today in Volgograd, shell damage preserved, memorial plaque explaining defense, tourists walking around perimeter, imagining what soldiers experienced during a 125-day siege. German veterans visit paying respects to Soviet defenders who achieved what seemed impossible. Russian veterans visit remembering comrades who died defending building that became more valuable through defense than through any inherent tactical significance. And historians study defense learning principles of urban warfare that 25 men proved through sustained courage, that buildings become fortresses when defended by soldiers who decide they're worth dying for.